In the light of recent events, is Anthony Albanese ever going to come back to Australia, or is he the new Australian ambassador for life?
Stephen, spicy.
Jack, thanks for your question. A big part of the Prime Minister's job is representing the government and our national interest overseas. And if I could refer to the most recent trip, he was over in the US at an APEC meeting. What's APEC? Well, it's an economic meeting of nation-state leaders. It was actually an organisation formed by Australia in the 1990s to ensure that we could better integrate our trading systems. Why does it matter to Australia? 1 in 4 jobs in Australia relies on our trade with those nations. It represents about 75% of the trade that Australia engages in. He was there quite simply to ensure that we weren't out of the big decisions that were being made on behalf of our country. And if you look back at all the other meetings that he's held and other countries that he's visited over the last 12, 18 months, it's pretty common in the first 12 months of a new government that they get very active and they get out there to introduce themselves and the country to other nations' leaders, and we do it in the national interest. And of course there was a coronation and a funeral in England that we had to go to as well. So a lot of reasons, a lot of work, and the whole team of us have been busy back here in Australia while he's been gone. OK,
so Dean, the coalition has been making hay with this, but if you look at the stats, Scott Morrison, Tony Abbott, they made a similar number of trips. So is this just political?
Well, PK, I like to say that all politics is local. And no one would dispute the fact that our national leader is also our international leader and has to travel abroad for significant events. But that can't come at the expense of our domestic issues. And I think this particular trip has drawn a bit of criticism because we had a High Court decision. People like myself and others argue that the Parliament was slow to legislate in response to that High Court decision. And I think is a powerful example of the Prime Minister not keeping both eyes on all of the issues, which is what required.
Just to fact-check you there, the Prime Minister says he was involved in the conversations around the legislation that we saw in the Parliament. I mean, we do have phones and the internet, like he was clearly involved. Why isn't that good enough? Well,
I think in politics, where you physically are sends a very powerful demonstration about what your values and what your priorities are. It wasn't if the Prime Minister had to catch a scheduled flight to APEC, had access to special purpose aircraft. So I think Australians were looking for a better demonstration that his eyes were on our domestic issues as much as they were on the international issues.
So it's about the optics.
It's about the optics, but I would add to that too that there's...
You missed one day of Parliament.
Sorry, we are...
One day.
Well, one day for a Prime Minister when there's a significant High Court issue which was ruled upon, of which the government knew was coming, whatever the outcome of that High Court decision was, they knew that a decision was coming. And I think many Australians would be surprised to have learnt that the government was caught flat-footed.
OK, Monique, did you think it was appropriate that he went?
Oh, I think this is petty politics, this arguing about whether or not the Prime Minister needs to be in Parliament on a specific day. It was the APEC meeting and we need our leadership to represent us at a really important meeting like this. Similarly, when the Prime Minister went to China, we need to repair our relationship with our most important trade partner, which had been left bruised and damaged, I would say, by the Morrison government. And I think that Mr Albanese's, Prime Minister Albanese's representation in China was effective, and we need our Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister to represent us well on the international stage.
You just mentioned China, so it's the perfect place for me to talk about that naval incident that we had. People might be across it, it's been in the news, and there was an Australian sailor injured. Minor injuries is our understanding, but from the sonar incident there. There has been a push, Monique, I'll just stay with you on this, for the Prime Minister to have raised this with the Chinese President Xi while he was overseas. He wouldn't clarify whether he had. Do you think he should clarify whether he raised it?
I think the most important thing is, firstly, to worry about the welfare of the diver, because sonar injuries, which can hurt your middle ear and cause other significant injuries, could be, threatening to that individual's career. So I hope he's okay. It sounds like it was a really nasty episode and it does need to be examined effectively. But I don't know that we need to know every detail of every conversation that the Prime Minister had. Again, this, to me, smacks of petty politics. what's not important is the timing of the conversation itself, is the nature of the conversation and the fact that this was obviously a significant event, and I hope that it's being dealt with appropriately by our diplomats. But, you know, again, I don't think we need to nitpick about every single thing that our senior politicians do. What we need to have is confidence and assurance that they're acting effectively on our behalf.
Yeah, I would love to, I'll come to you in a moment, but just Chris Richardson, do you think we should find out about whether this was raised with the Chinese leader?
No, some of these things have to be discussed very carefully and in private, and I have no problem with Prime Ministers travel. They all do it. This Prime Minister's travelled about the same as the others. I just can't get excited about that one.
You can't get excited. OK. Can you get excited about that?
I think I agree with Monique that this is petty politics, but the perception is there, and we can't discount the fact that people are not really confident. The ANU poll that came out in August, a nationally representative panel survey, shows that the general direct satisfaction with where the direction of the country, people are less and less satisfied. So I think it is true that Albanese is making the same number of trips, but what's happening at home, and just slightly touching on what Dean said, it's about people feeling that perhaps the issues at home are not getting as much attention as in the expense of perhaps issues outside.
Dean, your side of politics has been very critical this afternoon about the Prime Minister not revealing whether he'd raised it with President Xi, but I've heard from a couple of people on this panel now that he shouldn't have to reveal that level of detail. Just a clear question.
Yes.
Do you think he should have to reveal that?
Yes.
Why?
This is not petty politics. This was Chinese Defence Forces putting at risk the life of an Australian Defence Force personnel who was a diver undertaking important work on an Australian naval vessel. That is not petty politics. And if the life of Australian Defence Force personnel don't warrant an apology from the Chinese president, don't warrant some sort of disclosure from our own Prime Minister about what has happened, then what is the threshold? What is the threshold?
So you think this meets the threshold of disclosure for the Prime Minister to say...
This exceeds the threshold, would be my view, yes.
But the Prime Minister says, just to be clear, because we have to stick to all the facts as we know them right now, that this has been raised at the highest levels in the usual way. That's the language he used. So that implies that all of the diplomatic processes we have for raising this, it has been raised. Why is that not satisfactory?
Because I think the Australian electorate deserves a full and thorough explanation. A full and thorough explanation. Has an apology been sought by the Chinese leader in regards to this particular episode, which is very risky, has endangered the life of Australian Defence personnel? I think that is not petty politics. I think that takes the issue to a
Anthony Albanese should have said to the Chinese president, offer an apology?
Yes.
Can I just say on look, what the Liberal Party and what Dean and others are trying to do is deliberately set a bar that they know the government cannot meet. They know full well that relations between countries follow certain protocols. They know that the moment that the facts were verified in this, the Acting Prime Minister and the Defence Minister issued a stern public statement expressing the views of the Australian government. They also know that at the time the Prime Minister was meeting with the Chinese leadership, all the facts were not known. They know that. So what they are deliberately trying to do is set a bar in this issue, in this matter, that they know the government can't meet. And if I can say quite frankly, the lesson we need to learn from the coalition government in terms of our relationship with China is exactly what not to do. Is exactly what not to do. Because they left us on the back foot in the Pacific, they left us on the nose in Europe, and they left us out on the cold in China. That's how they managed our international relationships.
So
we
you're
have
saying,
worked very, very hard over the last 18 months to repair those relationships.
So you're saying it should be raised discreetly. Is that what you're essentially saying?
It should be raised in the appropriate ways, in the way that diplomatic issues are dealt with, and through the diplomatic channels.
So it's not leader to leader?
Let me go directly to that issue. What the Prime Minister won't do, and no sane, respectable, grown-up leader of any government will do, is reveal the private conversations they have with another world leader, let alone reveal the text messages that they send to another world leader. It is important in relationships between governments that you can have a private conversation and know the details of that conversation stay private.
Okay.